at the top of the week, the nation saw the second inauguration of Donald Trump.
From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first.
After the inauguration, the president hit the ground running, signing several executive orders, some of which dealing with immigration. The president has signaled that immigration will be one of his key priorities while in office. Trump signed an executive order outlawing birthright citizenship. This move led to outrage by elected officials around the country and here in New York. Governor Kathy Hochul and Attorney General Letitia James both released statements condemning the move by the president. New York is one of 22 states attempting to block the measure, and on Thursday, a federal judge issued an order to tentatively block the president's executive order. Given all of these recent events, we wanted to take a look at the state's approach to immigration reform under the new federal administration. Here's that story from our Elise Klein.
Another Trump administration taking on the White House has left many individuals and families in New York feeling anxious. Trump's plan to instigate mass deportations have left lawmakers with a sense of urgency to pass state immigration reform policy. In an immigration reform package of bills lawmakers are pushing for this session, including the New York for All Act, the Clemency Act, the Language Access Expansion Act, the Dignity Not Detention Act, and the Access to Legal Representation Act. These bills would prohibit the discovery and disclosure of immigration status via state and local resources, make improvements to clemency applications, and establish the right to legal counsel in immigration court. Assemblymember Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas, a Democrat representing Queens, says these bills are important to pass because we are facing a critical time where New York immigrant communities are deeply vulnerable.
New York must stand up for immigrant populations. We make up over 4.5 million people in the state. We contribute greatly to its economy. We make up a majority of the essential workers in the state. We have our small businesses. I'm a daughter of an immigrant, so it's very personal to me. And we have to make sure that we're protecting those who have come here to build a better life.
Advocate Miriam Kohaldi with the Arab American Association of New York says immigrant communities are terrified.
The constant threat of raids has been nonstop on our communities, and it has gotten to a point where we are receiving word from community members and clients who have immediately stopped working. They stopped attending school. They are scared to live their day-to-day lives, go grocery shopping, because they are afraid of being stopped by local law enforcement.
Gonzalez-Rojas stresses that preventing state and local officials from questioning individuals about their immigration status through the New York for All Act would improve public safety.
It also means that immigrants, if they're victims of a crime, that they're not fearful of calling the authorities to report a crime. It actually keeps the whole communities safe.
However, some Republicans across the aisle argue the legislature should be more worried about New Yorkers. State Senator Steve Chan, representing Brooklyn, raises concerns of immigrants who commit crimes being protected.
We have enough criminals here. We have enough murderers and rapists. We don't need to import some more. We don't need to harbor them and protect them. Let's get them out of here.
Chan says when he worked as a police officer, victims of crimes who didn't have citizenship were treated with kindness. He added if an individual without citizenship commits a crime, then they should be turned over to ICE. Other Republicans, like State Senator Mark Walczak, who represents Watertown, fear this bill skirts around federal immigration laws.
I think, to the Democrats that are saying we need to Trump-proof New York and not comply with federal law, I think there's going to be big problems. I think we need to do our job as New York State legislators.
State Senator Jessica Ramos, a Democrat representing Queens, argues this bill isn't about changing procedures that already take place, such as local law enforcement cooperating with ICE when necessary. It's about giving immigrant communities a chance for due process.
Perhaps this is where there's the disconnect. We believe in upholding a human being's right to due process, and we don't want families to be separated purely on accusations. We want to make sure that there is a fair trial. We want to make sure that there's a preponderance of evidence before those extreme actions take place.
Some advocates say other bills within the package, such as the Dignity Not Detention Act, would help end New York's participation with ICE detention centers. Uchechukwu Anwa, who immigrated to the United States in 2017 from Nigeria, says the conditions he faced in detention centers were inhumane.
Remembering when I was sick inside detention, I was also taken to a hospital with chains all over my body, my hands, my legs, even while I was in hospital bed.
For some advocates, policies like the Clemency Act could help them avoid deportation and provide more transparency around the application process by establishing efficiency changes to the application process. Pascal Carpenter, who goes by Shakori, is a Queens resident who says the Clemency Act would help him avoid being sent back to Haiti, a country he has never been to. During the summer of 2020, ICE officials came to Carpenter's home in Queens and arrested him. He then spent about 7 months in a detention center.
And I ended up being detained for 7 months. The most horrible 7 months of my entire life. It was an extremely depressing and really harsh emotional period for my family and myself.
Carpenter says he was born on a military base in Germany before his family moved to the United States in 1972. ICE claims Carpenter was born in Haiti, where his parents are from, and is a Haitian national. Nancy Moravec, Carpenter's lawyer and a law professor at NYU, says there are many reasons why his case is unfair to him. One of them being they have shown immigration court evidence via medical records and a birth certificate that he was born on United States soil on a military base in Germany, not in Haiti.
So it's just a mistake, but now it's like they changed their argument, and now they say, oh, well, he was born outside the United States, so he has to prove he's a U.S. citizen. That's what they say. We think that's wrong.
Moravec argues that putting the burden on Carpenter to additionally prove his citizenship beyond the birth certificate and hospital records is illegal. To try and stay in New York with his family, Carpenter applied for clemency, which means if the governor grants him a pardon, he can stay in New York with his fiancée and his teenage daughter.
I have an order of deportation that is currently pending on appeal, and that can take years. Now, with what the incoming administration has already promised, you know, it's not far-fetched to anticipate a van in front of my house with ICE agents coming into my home again and handcuffing me, putting me in chains and shackles, and transport me downtown.
Carpenter adds this idea of being sent back to an ICE detention center is something that has been causing him and his family a lot of anxiety and stress. Moravec stresses detention centers in a way are undermining when it comes to due process in immigration court, especially when there are many barriers facing individuals who try to prove their right to stay in the United States.
But if you do not have counsel, if you do not have access to your documents, if you do not have access to people who can help you from your family or other people, then you can't assert your rights to remain. And so detention completely undermines due process. And that's, I think, the biggest threat. We see the incoming Trump administration planning to greatly expand detention.
Carpenter's case came to ICE's attention because he was convicted of felony murder for being a lookout in a 1990 mugging that resulted in the death of a Utah resident visiting New York City. Carpenter says he had no idea there would be any violence. However, in New York law, if an individual is involved in a crime that results in a death, they are held equally responsible. He was sentenced with 6 other individuals at the time. Carpenter served his time and was released in 2015. His immigration case went to the courts in 2020. He lost his case, and his lawyers then filed for an appeal in 2023. Moravec says even though Carpenter had finished his sentence and his parole by the time ICE officials detained him and his deportation case was brought to the courts, it didn't matter because immigration laws don't have a statute of limitations.
That's another reason that immigration law is particularly cruel and unpredictable, and another reason why the powers of the governor become very important in terms of clemency.
If Carpenter is granted clemency, however, he won't have to worry about fighting in court. State Senator Zellner Myrie, a Democrat representing parts of Queens, says the Clemency Act is an attempt to ensure that the collateral consequences of being involved in the justice system don't manifest themselves in the worst ways.
Look, I think we are in a political climate that has not focused on the solutions to this problem, but in many instances has politicized this problem.
Myrie adds this is an enormous power the governor has, and there should be as much transparency as possible. Two other bills in the legislative package intend to provide legal counsel to individuals fighting in immigration court and expand language access for certain documents. The Access to Legal Representation Act would amend state law establishing the right to universal representation, meaning anyone facing the risk of deportation who cannot afford a lawyer will be provided one. Moravec says many individuals could greatly benefit from legal counsel in immigration court.
Immigration law has been many times likened to the tax code in terms of its complexity. It's very, very complicated. And the idea that somebody can navigate that on their own is really, it's a fallacy. And then, of course, navigating it on your own when you're in detention is even more impossible.
For some advocates, the Language Access Expansion Act would greatly improve their quality of life. Sabiha Obayed, an immigrant rights advocate, says language access is an issue that has been part of her story for a long time.
So I'm the child of immigrants. Both of my parents immigrated from Bangladesh. My mom immigrated first with her family in the late 90s. And for most of my early childhood, my father was still awaiting his visa approval. So a lot of the responsibilities fell on my mother. And I would watch her struggle with school registration forms, with doctor appointments, with the very little English that she knew. And as I grew older, I used to take on that responsibility where I would translate for the family and interpret for them.
The Language Access Expansion Act would require translated vital documents across various state agencies. Obayed says watching her family struggle has fueled her passion to advocate for this legislation. She says now that she's an adult with a full-time job, she can't accompany her parents to every appointment to help translate. This bill passing means she could worry less about their well-being. And Obayed isn't alone. While the legislative session has only just begun, many advocates and lawmakers have been rallying on the state capitol steps for these immigration reform policies. Many Democrats seem to be determined to pass these bills during the legislative session, while Republicans seem unsure or outright opposed. Senator Chan says, for example, the Access to Legal Representation Act he wants to review in more detail.
Why, we have to waste all of our resources in this aspect, but we can certainly help certain individuals on a case-by-case basis. Not every immigrant is the same.
State Senator George Borrello, a Republican representing parts of the Finger Lakes, stresses state lawmakers' number one job should be to protect New Yorkers.
All of these pieces of legislation are there to put barriers in front of the Trump administration deporting people who have committed heinous crimes against the people of New York State. I don't see any support for that, and I would hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would also understand that their number one job is to protect the citizens of New York State.
Some Democrats argue their Republican colleagues across the aisle are completely off the mark when it comes to arguing against these immigration reform policies. State Senator Jabari Brisport, a Democrat representing Brooklyn, says from day one of session this year, Republicans have tried to make immigrants the enemy.
They wanted to use them as a foil to push their far right-wing agenda. I don't see any conversations being fruitful with the minority on immigration this year.
However, despite the controversy they carry in the chamber, these bills seem to have wide support. While the bills didn't make it across the finish line last session, Brisport says this year, if they have the political will, then they will make it to the floor and pass. He says last year that political pressure was simply lacking.
We did not build enough political pressure. We have to fight for good things in government or else they don't happen. Nothing happens by chance. We need to organize and we need to fight for them.
A fight is exactly what many lawmakers plan on bringing to the chamber for this package of immigration reform bills. Some lawmakers say a new Trump administration taking place could very well build the political pressure needed to get these pieces of legislation across the finish line. Elise Klein, New York Now.
And for more information on the state's approach to immigration reform this year under the new federal administration, you can visit our website. Again, that's at nynow.org.